Erin, you've really aged. Women over 40 are pretty much done for, aren't they?
I think so too. Compared to the moms of other kids in my class, she's the oldest, and it's embarrassing.
Yeah, I get it.
Mom doesn't need to come to school events anymore. It's better if only Dad comes.
I totally understand how you feel, Paul. To be honest, I regret marrying her.
Right.
Recently, my husband Joseph and our son Paul have been having these kinds of conversations right in front of me. I am Erin, 42 years old. I live with my husband, who's 5 years younger than me, and our 10-year-old son. Joseph works for a cosmetics company. Both my parents have passed away, but Joseph's are still alive. Joseph's brother and his family live with his parents. They have 5 kids, so his parents are too busy with their grandchildren to pay much attention to us. In a way, it's easier than them meddling too much, so I don't really mind. Joseph used to be very caring, kind when we got married, but now he treats me like I'm just middle-aged. Paul, growing up seeing this, has started to speak rudely to me, imitating Joseph. No matter how much I scold him, he doesn't listen because Joseph just laughs it off.
But Dad says it's good to be honest about everything.
It's not nice to say things that hurts others. Didn't your teacher scold you recently for that? Paul recently made a girl in his class cry by calling her ugly. I had just been contacted and scolded by his teacher about it. It happens too often. I blame his father, who never scolds him. They're truly like father, like son. But Paul is only 10. I worry about what he'll become in the future if he is like this now. Even as an adult, it hurts to hear such things. Being called old or ugly every day by the only 2 family members have really gets me down. I quit my job to get married and raise Paul. But once he started elementary school, I took a part-time job at a supermarket. Actually, that's where I met Joseph. We started talking after seeing each other there a few times, and that led to dating and then marriage. I used to be a full-time employee at the main branch of the supermarket, but now I work part-time at a branch within walking distance from our home. Lately, I've been working weekends too, and the manager is happy about it. Are you sure it's okay? What about your husband and son? It's a big help that you can work on weekends. Yes, my husband takes care of our son. Your husband sounds great. That's the usual response when I say that. Indeed, Joseph often takes Paul out on weekends. But it's more like they're treating me as a nuisance than looking after him. Erin doesn't need to come with us.
Yeah, it's more fun just with Dad.
It'd be embarrassing if people thought Erin was part of the family.
I don't want people to think my mom is someone as ugly as her.
That's what they say about me. So he's far from a good husband.
If you give me more allowance, I might go out with you,
Paul sometimes says. That must be Joseph's influence. I already give you a monthly allowance.
It's not nearly enough.
Telling him to spend it more wisely doesn't help. He almost always spends it all on the same day he gets it. It goes on snacks and games, just frivolous things. An ugly woman should stay home alone.
It's Mom's fault. She doesn't give me enough allowance.
Saying that, Joseph and Paul left again today. I've been working on weekends lately, but the manager told me to take a break and relax with my family for once, and I couldn't refuse bluntly. I felt too embarrassed to admit to him that I was being ostracized by Joseph and Paul. After finishing the cleaning and laundry, I let out a big sigh. Having nothing else to do, I thought about going shopping for the first time in a while. A little stroll outside would be a nice change of pace. I enjoyed some window shopping, but then realized I didn't particularly want anything. Before I knew it, I found myself in front of a restaurant we used to visit often when Paul was still in preschool. Back then, Paul didn't talk back like he does now, and Joseph was still kind. I almost teared up thinking about those times. No matter how fondly I recall the past, it won't change the present. I left the place with that thought. A bit further away, I heard a familiar voice and turned around. What? There were Joseph and Paul with an unfamiliar woman, looking like a happy family, entering the restaurant without noticing me. Who was that woman? Paul was smiling at her, a smile he had never shown me. Back home, the image of Paul's smile kept flashing in my mind. Their close behavior didn't seem like they had just met yesterday. Had Joseph and Paul been meeting that woman on their outings? Then the worst thought crossed my mind. Was she Joseph's? When Joseph and Paul returned home that night, they acted as usual. I guess meeting that woman had become routine for Paul, so I decided to ask Paul first, wanting to know what Joseph told him about her. Hey, Paul, I saw you with Dad and a woman I don't know yesterday. Who is she?
Ah, you saw? She's much prettier than Mom, right?
Dad's friend?
No, she's Dad's girlfriend.
What?
That's what Dad said. He told me to keep it a secret from you, Mom. But now that you've seen it, can't help it. If you were as pretty as her, I'd have gone out with you too.
I was speechless at Paul's words, smiling, and shocked that Joseph had brazenly introduced his affair to Paul. I couldn't pretend not to know anymore. That night, I confronted Joseph with what I saw and what Paul said, planning to discuss it away from Paul, but Joseph said there was no need to hide it since Paul knew everything already. So we talked in the living room. Paul sat on a kitchen chair, silently listening. I had no choice but to ask about the woman. Joseph admitted to the affair without hesitation. I was actually thinking of talking about it soon. What do you mean? Layla is crazy about me and desperately wants to marry me. To do that, I need to divorce you. Layla is 12 years younger than you, Aaron. She's 30 and beautiful. Anyone would say she's the better choice, right? But taking your child to meet your mistress? What are you thinking? I thought it'd be better for Paul to get used to his new mom. What? Hey, Paul, what do you want? To live with this woman? Or your new mom? Which one?
I obviously want to live with Dad and my new mom. The nuisance should just leave.
Paul! I felt like being hit in the head with a hammer. I never thought Paul would say such things to me. But this house was left to me by my father. I have no reason to leave. I was about to say that when Joseph spoke first. Paul, this house was built by Mom's dad. So if we divorce, we won't live here anymore.
Is that so?
But Paul, do you want to live here? In this old-fashioned shack?
What will we do then?
We have the new Mom's house.
We can live in that beautiful apartment?
That's right. That will be better for Paul, wouldn't it?
Of course. So old Mom and the old house, we don't need them anymore.
You got it, Paul, just like my son. Joseph's mistress had apparently lost her parents too, but she owned a beauty salon with her inheritance and was quite well off. Joseph had become close to her after making a deal to supply his company's cosmetics to her salon, and he was planning to quit his job and become an executive at her salon after divorcing me and marrying her. I was astonished that things had progressed that far. If Paul prefers Joseph's mistress over me, there's nothing I can do. I agreed to the divorce, exhausted and without the will to hold back. Of course, I demanded alimony, but Joseph just laughed. If it can be settled with money, it's cheap. Layla will pay. This way, I can finally be free of you, Aaron. Paul laughed alongside Joseph. After I signed the divorce papers, Joseph and Paul left looking happy. Watching them go, I felt my heart growing colder. Had I become such a boring person that they could look down on me like this? I thought I had tried my best for Joseph and Paul. Feeling pathetic that this was the result, I decided to forget them. There was no point in staying down. It was foolish to waste any more of my life for them. I was glad I had a part-time job. Having a place to work felt incredibly reassuring. And 3 months after the divorce, I was offered a full-time position. I was so happy. Discarded like trash by Joseph and Paul, finding a place that recognized and needed me was a relief. I decided to work hard and live my life seriously. 5 years passed, and one day, my doorbell rang insistently. When I rushed to answer, 2 shabby men were standing there. At first, I thought they were beggars, but who would beg at someone's house these days? Then the younger man said, "Mom, I've missed you. Who are you?" "It's me, Paul." "I've missed you too, Aaron." It was Joseph and Paul. They had become thin, haggard, and unkempt, completely different from 5 years ago. Paul, who was 10 then, was now 15, a 9th grader. Teenagers grow fast. I wouldn't have recognized him under normal circumstances, but why were they here now, looking like this? "The house has really changed. It's so impressive now. Aaron, where did you hide all this money?"
"That's none of your business."
"Hey, let's get back together."
"What nonsense are you talking about?"
Apparently, they had tried to rely on Joseph's family, but 5 grandchildren, the eldest in college, it was the most financially demanding time for them. They couldn't afford to help and didn't want to be burdened by Joseph and Paul, so they were turned away. "Mom, help me."
"What?
"Who's your mom?" "Mom, don't you recognize me? It's Paul. Have you forgotten your own son?"
"Well, I don't know. As I said before, I don't have a son. Did you need something?"
"Aaron, are you still holding a grudge about what happened 5 years ago? It's all in the past, isn't it?"
"The past?"
"Deep down, you wanted us to come back, right? You've been waiting, haven't you?" Hearing this, I realized that I had barely thought of them at all over these 5 years. They had already become strangers to me.
"Aren't you happily remarried to that young, wealthy woman?"
"Can't you see how far we looked at? That's not the case." Even if he said that, it was none of my concern. I had no interest in their appearance or situation. Then, perhaps seeking sympathy, Joseph began to cry and talk. He explained how Lila's beauty salon had gone bankrupt in its 3rd year, how they were being sued because they've taken high payments for treatments in advance, and how there were unpaid wages and lawsuits from former employees. He kept talking, unasked. Layla was working nights, but blamed Joseph for not doing enough sales, forcing him to work part-time at a grocery store and as a day laborer at construction sites to pay off debts. Paul was burdened with all the household chores, allowed only 1 meal a day, and told to drop out and work.
"So what? How is any of that my concern?"
"Help us! Layla hasn't been home for a week. All my earnings go to debt payments, and without Layla's income, we have nothing to eat."
"I don't care about your problems."
"I always preferred you to her. Dad betrayed you, so it's understandable you're angry, but I'm your son." "Aaron, are you betraying me?"
"I was just a kid taken away by Dad.
Please, Mom, let me stay here. I want to go to high school and I'll use my allowance wisely."
"Allowance?"
To think they expected me to feed them, send Paul to school, and even give him an allowance? And not a single word of apology from either of them? Like father, like son. "I am your son, Mom. You can't abandon me. A mother can't ignore her struggling son. Paul, you planning to come back here alone? Well, Dad's divorced from you, so he's a stranger now, but it's different for me. Do you even know the truth, Paul? The truth? Paul is just like me, a stranger to Aaron. Even if Paul wants to live comfortably here, I won't let him do that. What do you mean? Paul's biological mother had passed away shortly after he was born. For a while, Joseph's parents took care of him, but they couldn't manage with their own young kids. Eventually, they gave up. That's when Joseph, with baby Paul, started coming to our supermarket. I felt sorry for him and ended up marrying him on Paul's first birthday. I thought of Paul as my own son and decided to raise him with care. Initially, Joseph was grateful and helped around the house, and I was glad to be married. But as Paul started elementary school, Joseph stopped helping and started saying, "You're cold to him because he's not your flesh and blood," whenever I scolded Paul for misbehavior. It became harder to scold Paul after hearing that so often, and so Paul became a child who spoke rudely and looked down on others. I tried my best to correct his behavior, but Joseph's tacit approval only made Paul more disrespectful. Moreover, after Paul chose Joseph's mistress over me as his mother, any maternal feelings I had for him had vanished. That's why I felt no sympathy for Paul now, pleading for help while arguing with Joseph. I realized I could never be his mother. Maybe we were never that close after all. Some families are close despite not being blood related, but I couldn't be that way. And I didn't want to become his mother again. That was my honest feeling, and there was nothing I could do about it. Can you two, who are unrelated to me, stop standing in front of my house in such a shabby state? It's a nuisance, so please leave. That's harsh. What if at that time? What? 5 years ago, if you had said you wanted to live with me, even without blood ties, I was ready to go through any hardship to raise you. Mom, you chose to leave me first, Paul, so I am no longer your mother. Don't come here again, and you too, Joseph. At my words, Paul and Joseph both slumped their shoulders. Then as I said those words, my husband Brian came home. What's wrong? Welcome home. Aaron, you remarried? Yes, 2 years ago. Who are they? Some people from the past, but they were just leaving. I had told Brian about my divorce and my son. He probably realized that these two were my former family. Without saying a word to them, Brian turned his gaze back to me. I'm home. What's for dinner? Your favorite meat and potatoes. Looking forward to it. Let's go inside. You're done here, right? Brian put his hand on my back and glared at them. They stood there stunned, but I entered the house with Brian, closing the door behind us. Later, Joseph's wife was arrested for fraud. Apparently, as their business struggled, they pretended to use high-quality cosmetics but actually diluted them with water or switched them to cheap drugstore products, selling them as their own luxury brand. An employee who did not receive his salary filed a complaint. Joseph, being in charge of oversight, couldn't escape liability for damages. Paul, though he graduated from middle school, didn't go to high school and was working part-time somewhere. Joseph came asking for money, but of course, I turned him down. Brian is a department head at the supermarket's headquarters. Brian, too, is remarried. His previous wife passed away from illness 3 years into their marriage. Over 20 years ago, they had no children. I think I wouldn't have remarried if Brian had children. It's not because I dislike parenting. I couldn't properly raise the only child I had. I didn't get to see him grow up. That's why I thought I couldn't be a mother again. Brian understands my feelings. When I said I wanted to live in the house left by my parents, he agreed and renovated it for us. He's always thoughtful and kind, and I want to stay by his side forever.
You threw it away? The $1,500 watch my father gave me as a birthday gift? My husband, Sean, was gifted a watch by his father-in-law. It never left his wrist. I nodded and said, "That's right. I threw it in the garbage. I would do it again, too." Sean became even angrier at my response. He yelled, "You're an asshole, you know that? Are you insane?" I guess you could see it that way, but my name is Michaela, Mickey for short, and I am 29 years old. Sean and I were married a year ago, and unfortunately, we live with my in-laws in their house. My father-in-law never misses an opportunity to put me down. "You're not even good at making tea," he loves to tout. Every day is a living hell. I would pray that I would wake up from this horrible dream. My husband and I went to the same high school, and we re-met at our reunion. He confessed that he had always loved me, and we began dating before getting married a year ago. I was so happy. I loved Sean, and I was so excited about our life together. As long as he was by my side, I would always be taken care of, and I thought that I would be a part of a beautiful family. But now I realize that these thoughts were very, very naive. After we got married, I moved in with my husband and my in-laws. I discovered that my father-in-law was a very troubled man. He was very old-fashioned, a misogynistic man, the type of man who would never dream of making his own tea. And according to Sean, he told Sean's mother that it was wrong for a woman to disobey a man. Once, he threw a plate at her for going against him. I was surprised when I heard this. I couldn't believe it, but it was true. In fact, I started to notice that my father-in-law was quite the xenophobe. He was very critical of me, an immigrant from abroad. I was working as an interpreter, speaking both English and Japanese. Maybe it wasn't because I was a foreigner. Perhaps it was because he didn't think very highly of me in the first place. In any case, he blamed me for everything and spoke ill of me. I love being an interpreter. It's a job where I feel my skills are most useful. Although there were assignments where I had to be on the field, most of my work was done at home for interpreting meetings and things like that. It's a job where I feel my skills are very useful. I was very good at my job, and I did not appreciate that my father-in-law would always insult my work. When he would go on, I would think to myself, "What's wrong with you? Hating someone just for speaking English? Just because they're a foreigner?" I don't prefer foreign countries. I hate English. I don't want to hear a word of English, and yet my son marries an English-speaking immigrant and brings her home to me. I often hear him muttering under his breath, "I can't stand foreigners." When I overhear him, I just want to cover my ears. He thinks that because I'm from a foreign country, I won't be good at tea ceremony or cooking a proper meal. But I've lived in Japan and I love Japanese culture. I've even taken care to learn Japanese manners. I looked at my father-in-law and said, "Even though I'm from another place, I've lived in Japan and I love Japan. Your behavior is embarrassing. Embarrassed? Who is embarrassed? I thought, you should be embarrassed for saying those heartless words to me just because I'm from another country. But even though I was annoyed by my father-in-law's words, I kept my mouth shut. I thought that even though he said such horrible things, he was Sean's father and I should just put up with it. At first I thought, just because he hates me now doesn't mean he won't learn to like me over time, even though he can't even look at me without a scowl on his face or even try to get to know me because of his prejudice. His words were so sarcastic and hurtful to me every day. I'm going to teach you to be Japanese the right way. He gives me jobs to do around the house. There was cleaning, like laundry, but I also had to rub his shoulders. It made me very sad to think that my father-in-law manipulated us to move in with them because he secretly wanted to make me miserable. At least, that's what it seemed like. I knew that I would never be able to understand him. Although my mother-in-law apologizes for him, she knows she can't say anything to him. I feel sorry for her, and I hated him for thinking he could control other people and make them suffer. I hated my father-in-law for being like this. There were times when I wanted to tell Sean the truth about his parents, but he was very busy with work and he was traveling a lot. I couldn't talk to him about it because I didn't want to worry him. Hey, it's time to make lunch. Hurry up. Since I work from home, I was often at home all day. My job doesn't just let me take breaks whenever I want. The meetings I interpret can go on forever, and it's hard to take a break at a certain time. I wanted to have a late lunch alone. That was my favorite. But my father-in-law had other ideas. Hurry up. He didn't care that I hadn't finished work yet. My father-in-law kept calling for me to hurry up. I have to work, so I want to eat lunch on my own time, I tried to explain to my father-in-law one time. This English-speaking job is not good for you. Don't you know it's customary to follow your in-laws' wishes? This is common sense. This is why immigrants are so annoying. They don't know such things, he said coldly. My father-in-law's words were so unreasonable, and it tortured me. He wanted me to cook lunch right then and enjoyed making things difficult for me. The most stressful thing for me was that he made it impossible for me to concentrate on my work. After that, my father-in-law's behavior toward me escalated further. He ordered me to clean the room every morning and made unreasonable rules, such as not getting up from my seat for lunch until everyone had finished eating. They would also come into my room and interrupt me when I was working. I don't want to hear English, I was once yelled at in front of my room. It was hard for me. Why do I have to go to this extreme? I had reached the end of my patience with my father-in-law's words and actions when they interfered with my work. If I didn't do something about it, I would lose my important job. And my heart was in shreds from the daily swipes he would take at my mother-in-law. I can't do this anymore. I was so happy to be married to Sean, whom I love. I thought that if I could stay by Sean's side, I would be fine even if things got bad. But, like I said, I was naive. I can't be with my father-in-law like this anymore. I am not happy at all. Tears welled up in my eyes because it was so painful. That night, I decided to talk to Sean about it, and I began crying. When I told him everything that my father-in-law had done to me, he was absolutely mortified. He apologized to me several times. "I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. I swore I would make you happy, Mickey." Sean confronted my in-laws about my suffering, and they were angry with me. Then he made me a proposal. "Mickey, let's move out. We don't have to live with my parents. Let's buy an apartment and live together." "Are you sure?" "Of course. I think it is the best thing for the two of us from now on." I was really happy. I felt like I had seen the light in the darkness. I felt reassured, and I was happy to have married this man. So, Sean and I moved out of the house. After we moved out, I never saw my in-laws again, and since Sean gave my father-in-law a hard time for how he treated me, he didn't do anything to me anymore. Life had returned to normal. I was soaking in the happiness of being able to spend my time freely and concentrate on my work every day. I realized that I had taken for granted the happiest thing in my life. 1 year later, I became pregnant. Sean was happy. He was full of happiness. Mom and Dad seem happy too. Sean seemed to have told my in-laws about my pregnancy. "Well, that's great." Even though I smiled outwardly that my in-laws were happy, my heart sank. It had been a year since that hellish day, and yet I still felt so bad when I remembered what my father-in-law had done to me. "Just because we're having a baby doesn't mean you have to see my parents. I don't want to do anything that will make you feel bad. The most important thing is the baby and you, Mickey," Sean told me. And then I safely made it to the day of the birth, and a healthy baby girl was born. I cried as she squeezed my hand with her tiny hands, and she loved me so much. It was as if all of the pain I had been going through was nothing. "You know," Sean asked me with an expression that made it difficult for me to say anything, "can I let my parents see her alone? They were so happy when I told them she was born safe and sound, and I wanted them to see their little girl." Sean then continued, "I'm sorry. I told you you didn't have to see them." I shook my head at Sean's words. "It's totally fine. I understand how you feel. It's natural to want to let your beautiful daughter meet your parents. And even though my father-in-law did such a terrible thing to me, I know that he cared for you. I wanted to fulfill your wish because I know how important they are to you. It's been a year since then. I'm sure your father-in-law has reflected on what's happened, and I wish I could see him too." When I said this, Sean put on a big smile. "Yes, that was a year ago, and people change. Let's think positive," I told myself. On the day I left the hospital, Sean, my daughter, and I were on our way to my in-laws' house. I had not seen my father-in-law since then, so I was a little nervous. When we arrived at my in-laws' house, they greeted us with smiles. Seeing my father-in-law looking a little happy as he looked at his little daughter, I felt relieved and at the same time glad that I had brought her with me. Sean also looked happy, and my father-in-law didn't seem to be making any sarcastic comments to me, which was a huge relief. Thank God, I knew my father-in-law was sorry for what he had done. Then my father-in-law brought out a gift-wrapped box and held it in front of me, saying, "Here is a gift for the birth of your child. It's a $1,500 watch. Please put it on display. $1,500? I was surprised that my father-in-law had prepared such a gift for us, but I was even more surprised by how much it cost. I had never heard of a watch costing $1,500. My mother-in-law, who was standing next to me, was also surprised, her eyes widening. Don't be surprised. It's my way of thanking you for letting me see my grandchild. Father-in-law, I was very surprised, but I was genuinely happy that my father-in-law had given me a gift. Maybe my father-in-law and I were finally starting to understand each other. My heart was filled with joy at the thought of my father-in-law's approval. After returning home, Sean and I immediately opened the gift celebrating our new baby from my father-in-law. Huh? We were surprised to see the watch. We were so surprised to see the watch because it looked like an ordinary wristwatch. We were a little surprised because we had imagined that a $1,500 watch would look much more flashy. We wondered why this watch cost this much, but since it was a baby gift from my father-in-law, we thought nothing more of it and decided to put it on the shelf in the living room. The phone rang. It's from my father-in-law again. Ever since we received that watch, he has been calling us a lot. For a little while, they were about things like wanting to hear about his grandchildren, but then, just like a year ago, he began to speak disparaging and accusing words about me. Even when I got fed up and ignored his calls, he would call again and again. I thought he might be getting suspicious of me. It was exactly at this time a year ago that I was disappointed that he had not changed, and saddened to think that he did not really like me. My father-in-law is such a relentless caller. Sometimes he would barge into my house if I did not answer the phone, so I had no choice but to pick up. The phone rang several times every day, and when I answered the phone, he would say all kinds of hurtful things. I was exhausted from childcare and work and even my father-in-law, and I was exhausted both physically and mentally. I was in pain, I was in agony, and I even cried. How can I get away from my father-in-law now? I thought I escaped him by moving out of the house, but now that I've left, he still torments me like this. Eventually, my father-in-law started pointing things out to me. Do immigrants only clean once a week? You only had Japanese food for 2 days this week. This is why foreigners are no good. These were the points he made about my behavior. Strangely enough, he was also right. How did he know that? I asked Sean if he was telling him, but he said he didn't know. I was a little scared at the time, but I thought it must be a coincidence. But then he continued to point out my behavior several times, and I felt that it was indeed strange, because everything my father-in-law said was true, and the points he was making were getting more and more specific day by day. I was scared. I felt like I was going crazy. You would have to be there to see this kind of thing. I felt goosebumps all over my body at that moment. Yes, you would have to see it to believe it. I tried to recall what had just happened with my father-in-law. No way, I realized. I was in an uproar when I realized what had happened, and I couldn't stop my body from shaking with fear. I couldn't stop shaking with fear because it was something I couldn't even imagine. Then I looked at my child who was sleeping slowly and thought, I had to protect her. I made a decision to do something, even though I felt my body trembling. Mickey? That night, Sean came home from work with the watch in his hand. He looked angry. You threw it away? The $1,500 watch my father gave me as our daughter's birthday present? Yes, the watch in Sean's hand had been given to us by his father-in-law at the birth of our daughter. I nodded and said, That's right. I threw it in the garbage, and I would do it again, too. Sean became even angrier at my response. You're an asshole, you know that? Are you insane? I guess you could see it that way, but I'm not the problem here. Let me show you. Why don't you push this button? I pointed to the black dot on the clock in Sean's hand. The clock that my father-in-law had given me had a little black button on it. Sean angrily did as I said. His complexion changed. What is this? Was the button a reset button? I wondered. We had never looked at it closely before. It's not a button? No, it's not a button. Take a closer look. Sean observed the small black spot just as I had said, and the look on his face became more and more blue. Camera. Sean was absolutely lost in thought. Yes, there was a hidden camera attached to the watch. He had to look closely to see it, so he hadn't noticed it until now. He had been watching us with that camera for a long time. Oh no! The reason my father-in-law knew my every move in detail and even knew exactly what was on the menu for dinner was because he had been watching me the whole time. I was horrified with him for doing this. I had a professional take a look. I even had it debugged. It was all your father-in-law's work. For a while, Sean froze in shock at my words, but soon his eyes became determined to do something. Mickey, I'm really, really sorry. I'm sorry I put you through this again. I'll never forgive you, Dad. The next day, Sean and I left our daughter with my parents and headed for my in-laws' house. As soon as we arrived, Sean went to my father-in-law, put the clock in front of him, and said, Dad, why do you think we're here? You do know why, don't you? Sean's eyes were filled with anger. My father-in-law's face scrunched up a little at the sight of Sean's temper. What are you talking about? He said in a blank voice. What are you talking about? You're crazy to give her a wristwatch with a hidden camera and a wiretap on it. But my father-in-law insisted. I don't know. Oh yeah? So that's why it cost $1,500, but I had no idea. My father-in-law would never admit it. I could feel my anger rising at my father-in-law's refusal to admit it. Do you have any proof? Any evidence that I did it? My father-in-law grins at me. I'm sorry you have no proof, but I'm going to have to ask you to pay the price for my breaking heart. You're the one who's going to pay that fee. My mother-in-law, who had never said anything to me before, interjected. Because I am divorcing you. What? What are you talking about? He was a little upset, but he didn't seem to take it seriously. That's just as well, because until now, my mother-in-law had never disobeyed my father-in-law in any way. I told my mother in advance what my father had done, Sean said. After Sean told me, I had a look at your room. What? My father-in-law, who had looked relaxed a moment ago, was becoming impatient. I wanted to think it was a lie, too. Eavesdropping and photographing is a crime, you know. But in your room, there were videos of Sean and his family and his house and so on. I can't believe you really did this. My father-in-law was seeing red. Sean questioned him further. I asked my mother to find receipts for that watch. Here. Sean put the receipts and order forms for the watches in front of his father-in-law. This watch is custom made. You ordered a hidden camera and a wiretap, didn't you? I have solid proof right here. Then, knowing he could no longer get away with it, he confessed everything. I lost the chance to tell Mickey how disgusted I was with her, so I thought I'd watch her behavior on camera, my father-in-law said. Everyone in the room who heard these words felt a surge of indescribable anger and exclaimed in exasperation. After that, my mother-in-law divorced my father-in-law. My father-in-law had to pay alimony to my mother-in-law. Moreover, the house belonged to my mother-in-law's parents, who had given it to her as a gift. So, as a result, my father-in-law was also evicted from the house and now lives alone in a small apartment. My mother-in-law has apparently been enduring unreasonable orders from my father-in-law up until now. She says this was all for Sean's sake. But before she knew it, she was tied down by her husband and she could not escape. But when she saw me being tormented by him too, she became angry at herself for not having the courage to protect me. And finally, she woke up and said he had to get away from this person. Now that she is free from her husband, my mother-in-law lives at her own pace and very leisurely. Sean also cut ties with his father-in-law, and there was no one left. I live very happily with my husband, Sean, and our daughter. Sean, who used to work a lot of business trips and overtime, changed his job to spend more time with his family, and I can spend more time with him than ever before. And since the incident with my father-in-law, we have been able to talk to each other about any problems, big or small. And I think our relationship as a couple has grown even deeper. I am happier now than I ever have been. Happiness comes in different forms for different people, but I want to cherish my own happiness. It is wrong to sacrifice oneself for the sake of someone else's happiness.
Oh, I can't stand it. Every time I see Sherry's face, I feel sick. Oh dear, that's terrible. Sherry, please pack your things and leave. What if something happens to Betty's child because of you? I couldn't help but sigh at the malicious grins on mother-in-law and sister-in-law's faces. Feeling all my efforts had been in vain, I replied weakly, "All right, I'll leave." My name is Sherry. I live with my husband, Alan, in his family home. His father passed away, and since his mother has mobility issues, I knew we'd been living with her when we decided to get married. Before Alan and I got married, his mother was genuinely kind. She was always calm, smiling, and whenever I helped her, she'd always say, "Thank you." I thought living with such a mother-in-law would be manageable. That was the biggest mistake of my life. Once Alan and I got married and started living together, her true colors began to show. First, she stopped thanking me for anything I did. I wasn't doing chores just to hear her gratitude, so I didn't mind at first. But gradually, instead of thanks, she began to complain. "You're so slow. Alan will be home soon, and you haven't cleaned the bath or finished dinner. What's going on?" "Well, I'm sorry, but Alan just happened to come home early today. I've been doing the chores as usual." "If your husband comes home early, you should work faster. You don't care enough about Alan." "That's not true." "I don't want to hear your excuses. Poor Alan. Why did he marry someone like you?" There was no trace left of the kind woman I had known before our marriage. Still, I tried my best to meet her expectations. I could keep going because of Alan's support. In front of Alan, she pretended to be the ideal mother-in-law and was kind to me. But I talked to Alan about how she behaved when he wasn't around. Alan believed me and said, "I'll talk to Mom," and he did. After being scolded by Alan, she'd behave for a few days. But then she'd go back to her old ways. This cycle continued until one day she received a phone call. It was probably sister-in-law Betty, loudly bad-mouthing me so I could hear. Betty, who's married and currently pregnant with her first child, is just like her mother. She changes her attitude depending on the person and, frankly, has a bad personality. She once said, "I never thought my brother would marry someone as wonderful as you." But now, she says, "You're always causing trouble for Mom. You're so useless." Mother-in-law and Betty have a weekly phone call where they bond over criticizing me. I was getting numb to it all, but after hanging up, mother-in-law cheerfully called out to me and dropped a bombshell. Betty is getting a divorce. Her husband was a plain guy. Anyway, so it's for the best. Once she comes back for the birth, she'll stay here. You might not be needed anymore, Sherry. What? Oh, I can't wait. Make sure you prepare a feast for the day Betty comes home. I felt devastated. Until now, it had been mother-in-law versus me. With Betty moving in, it would be mother-in-law and Betty against me. I was already worn down by mother-in-law's constant complaints. The thought of another person adding to that was unbearable. Trying not to let mother-in-law see, I shed silent tears while vacuuming. I couldn't take this life anymore. A few days later, Betty arrived. Heavily pregnant, she was in her 9th month. I greeted her with a hello. Immediately, she complained, "At least offer to take my bags." After taking her luggage to the room she'd been staying in, I heard her loud voice from the living room. "Sherry really does have a plain face, doesn't she?" As I prepared tea in the kitchen, Betty exclaimed, "Oh, I can't stand it. Just looking at Sherry makes me feel sick." Next to her, mother-in-law, laughing with a face just like Betty's, exaggeratedly said, "Oh dear, that's terrible. Sherry, pack your things and leave. What if something happens to Betty's child because of you?" Betty laughed mockingly. I had done my best for mother-in-law, but it seemed all for nothing. Feeling empty, I sighed and replied weakly, "All right, I'll leave." I had anticipated this outcome from the moment I heard Betty was returning here. I had always known that a day would come when I'd leave this house in anger or sadness. I quickly grabbed my already packed bags, headed to the entrance, and picked up my car keys. Perhaps not expecting me to actually leave, mother-in-law called out from behind. "Oh, Sherry, are you really leaving? That's fine, but make sure you divorce Alan. He deserves someone much better." "I think that's for Alan to decide. Thank you for everything," I replied calmly and left the house. I called my parents, who warmly told me to come home. They were furious when I told them about mother-in-law and Betty's comments. "You don't need to go back to that house," they assured me, and for the first time in a while, I genuinely smiled. That evening, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Ellen stood there. "Welcome home, Ellen." "Thanks. Living with your parents will be a bit nerve-wracking, huh?" "Don't worry. You'll get used to it quickly. I guarantee it." As I greeted Alan with a smile and invited him in, he first apologized to my parents. I had told them how supportive Alan had always been, so they felt bad about his apology. Instead, they thanked him for trying to protect me and warmly welcomed him, saying, "Feel free to live here as you wish." Why did Ellen fit in so well with my parents? It was because when I found out Betty was moving back after her divorce, I had proposed a divorce to Ellen. I told him, "I'm already struggling with mother-in-law, and I can't handle Betty on top of that." And I cried, saying, "Even if it means divorcing, I want to leave that house." Ellen was shocked, but immediately apologized, saying he hadn't realized how much I was suffering. He didn't want a divorce and had negotiated with my parents that if things got too bad, he'd move in with me at my parents' house. It seems that Alan plans to live in my parents' house for a while and then buy a house somewhere else. I was overjoyed when Alan came to my parents' house. I was happy that he chose me over mother-in-law and Betty. My mother prepared a feast to celebrate our arrival. As we enjoyed our meal and relaxed, my phone rang. It was mother-in-law. When I answered with a simple hello, I heard her panicked voice. "Sherry, Alan hasn't come home yet. It's already late. Do you know where he is? I've tried calling him, but he's not answering. I'm worried something's happened." "Oh, Alan's right here. It seems he's blocked your number." As I spoke to Alan beside me, I heard mother-in-law's confused voice on the other end. Alan casually said, "Yeah, I've blocked your number." I relayed this to mother-in-law. "What do you mean? Is Alan with you?" "Yes, we're married after all." "Why, send Alan back immediately. Didn't you say you'd divorce him?" "Alan doesn't want a divorce, and neither do I. This is a matter between a husband and wife, not something for mother-in-law to dictate." I responded calmly, and suddenly mother-in-law burst into tears. "Why? Why?" she sobbed. Betty, seemingly unable to watch mother-in-law any longer, took the phone and said, "So you've stolen my brother? You're the worst." "I haven't stolen anyone. Ellen and I are married." "You might have a plain face, but you're so audacious. One day my brother will see the truth and you'll regret it." Suddenly, the call ended, so I filled Ellen in on the conversation. Both of us, in disbelief, blocked mother-in-law's number. I also got Betty's number from Ellen and blocked it. With ties severed from mother-in-law and Betty, Ellen and I began searching for a new home. After visiting various properties, we found our dream home and decided to move out of my parents' house. We expressed our gratitude to my parents, who had let us stay for several months. They told us, "You can always come back," warming our hearts. One day, after settling into our new home and enjoying peaceful days, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Considering we had just moved, I thought it might be a service provider and answered. To my surprise, an angry voice shouted, "Finally, you pick up?" Confused, I asked, "Who's this? You've forgotten your sister-in-law?" I realized it was Betty. "Oh, Betty, how did you get this number?" I was sure I had blocked her number. She apparently changed her number when she got a new phone. I thought I'd have to block this one too when Betty suddenly said, "Come back right now. I just had a baby and the house is a mess. Mom doesn't do anything." Well, mother-in-law has a bad leg, so it's understandable to some extent, right? "That's no excuse. I'm struggling postpartum and she's using her leg pain to avoid chores." From Betty's words, it was clear she and mother-in-law weren't getting along. Neither mother-in-law nor Betty want to do housework, so it's only natural that they push each other. But that wasn't my concern. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I have no plans to return." "Why not? You haven't divorced Alan, right? We're family. We should help each other." "It's funny you consider me family now." I chuckled and Betty shouted in frustration. But I wasn't fazed. I wouldn't have to see her face again. When you see me, you feel sick because of my plain face. I'm truly sorry. If I came back to help, you'd just feel worse. Mother-in-law also didn't want to live with me. It's okay if you don't consider me family. I might not have lived with you, but I never badmouthed you like Mom did. I know you and mother-in-law would talk about me on the phone. Mother-in-law would purposely put it on speaker so I could hear. I know everything you said about me. I had heard all their phone conversations where they'd gossip about me. Betty seemed to be searching for an excuse. But I told her I wasn't coming back and hung up. I immediately blocked Betty's new number and resumed tidying up. That evening, a tired-looking Ellen came home and said, "Betty called me today. She changed her number." It seems Betty had called Ellen in tears. The relationship between mother-in-law and Betty was at its worst, with constant fights whenever they met. They argued over household chores, even throwing objects at each other. When Ellen, concerned about the newborn, asked about the child, Betty broke down crying. Shockingly, Betty's child had been taken away by her ex-husband. He had pleaded with Betty, saying he desperately wanted to see the child. In response, Betty had retorted, "What do you want seeing the child for? You're just a nuisance." Hearing this, her ex-husband declared he couldn't trust Betty with the child and took the baby away. In a fit of anger, Betty had said, "Then you raise the child." Now, regretting her words, she is embroiled in a custody battle. Mother-in-law's leg condition seems to have worsened. She's been advised to live in a wheelchair, but there is no way Betty would care for her. Mother-in-law manages with a cane at home, but the day she'll need to move to a facility she despises seems imminent. Betty had apparently sought Ellen's help, but their predicament was a result of their own actions. Ellen reportedly told her, "If you had treated Sherry right, you wouldn't be in this mess," before hanging up. Of course, he then blocked her number. No matter how unreasonable they are, they're still family to Ellen. I worried that Ellen might be hurt because of me, but he reassured me with a bright smile, saying, "You are my top priority, so it's okay. Besides, I'll be a father soon, too." Smiling at Ellen's words, I gently caressed my still growing belly, replying, "That's right. For the sake of our unborn child, it's best to sever ties with mother-in-law and Betty. That's our decision as future parents." We have no intention of informing mother-in-law and Betty about our child. Alan, myself, and my parents want to shower this child with all the love we can offer.
Call 911 quick, what's happening? Oh no! On the verge of tears, panicking right in front of me is the woman who has long held the #1 spot in my personal most disliked list and has just been promoted to my Hall of Infamy, my dreaded mother-in-law. Just for reference, the runner-up is the brown intruder that takes up residence in my home every summer without any invitation. I'd rather not even utter his name. Please take a guess. The reason she's made it to the Hall of Infamy is because from this point on, I won't have to deal with her in my life. Goodbye, mother-in-law. My name is Michelle, 29-year-old office worker. I'm about to hit my 5th year of marriage with my husband, David. We don't have any kids. Yet. My husband and I work at the same company. Initially, he was my boss. I fell head over heels for him shortly after I joined the firm. Maybe my youthful vigor played a part in my relentless pursuit, but eventually he gave in and we ended up marrying. I was under the impression that I had initiated a romance, but after we married, he said, "Actually, I thought you were wonderful from the moment you joined the company." I remember how happy I was to hear this, laughing at his post-marriage confession. David is somewhat cool, or to put it another way, he seldom shows his emotions. But that doesn't mean he's cold. Quite the contrary, he's extremely emotional. When we went to see a tearjerker that was the talk of the town, David started crying heavily quite early into the film. Seeing this man, who usually appears unfazed by anything, showing this very human side made me love him even more. Our gears seemed to mesh well, and though we'd been married for a while, we'd led a peaceful life without any major fights. Then an event occurred that threatened our tranquil existence. It started with a phone call.
"Hello, Michelle. My daughter's going on a long business trip. I'll be lonely, so let's get along well. Well, you haven't done much as a daughter-in-law anyway, so it's about time."
What an annoyingly sarcastic message to receive after a long time of no contact. The caller was my mother-in-law, my husband's mother. From the moment we got married, she and I had never really gotten along. David knew this and told me I didn't have to try to get along with her if it was difficult. Of course, as a married woman, I wanted to be on good terms with my mother-in-law. But something unforgivable happened during our first Christmas gathering after the wedding. Before marrying David, I'd always lived at my parents' home, and regrettably, I wasn't good at cooking, relying too much on my family. When I made a fried egg, it was charred black. Once I moved out, I really appreciated my mother. When I tried to help with the cooking at the Christmas gathering, it didn't go well. "Oh, Michelle, how long are you going to spend peeling? You're really inconveniencing us." "I'm sorry, I'm not very good at cooking." "Huh? You can't cook? That's ridiculous. You're married to David and are still working. Isn't it about time you stopped?" I was ridiculed. Unable to retort, all I could do was force a smile. When we tasted the finished dish, it hardly had any flavor. Is this the taste of David's family home cooking? I thought. Then right in front of me, my mother-in-law started making a fuss. "What? You said you were good at making this dish, so I left it to you. Oh no, what is this? It's tasteless. Can you explain, Michelle?" She said this in a rather exaggerated manner. But I'd never said I was good at making the dish, let alone anything to her. I even asked, "Mother-in-law, do you not season your stew at all?" To which she glared at me. "The flavor comes from the ingredients. You don't even know that? How embarrassing." Is that so? Well, it might be somewhat true. I thought it would be better to add at least salt or soy sauce. But I had just followed my mother-in-law's instructions. In other words, her aim from the start was probably to embarrass me. I felt pathetic. Frustration welled up inside me, tears threatening to spill over. Is this what they call mother-in-law bullying? Will this go on forever? Such were my thoughts. Just then, my husband David suddenly stood up, took my hand, and headed towards the entrance. "Hey, what's happening all of a sudden?" My mother-in-law rushed after David in a panic, but he calmly put on his shoes. "Is it fun to start Christmas dinner with such a pointless argument?" he said to his mother, and then he forcefully shut the front door with me in tow. Throughout the ride home, David's phone kept ringing. Presumably, it was my mother-in-law. Seeing that David showed no intention of answering, I asked him, "The call, isn't it from your mom? Aren't you going to answer?" "She's always been like this. She loves belittling people, and that's why she got divorced from my father." David murmured, his gaze fixed ahead, his tone laced with sadness. When my mother-in-law realized David wasn't answering, she started calling me. David said it was fine to ignore her, so I did. Once she realized we had no intention of forgiving her, the calls from my mother-in-law ceased. After that, we didn't hear from her. However, we did receive a message from David's older sister, who had been at the same gathering. My husband has one sister. She is a lot like David, not much for expressing her emotion. She isn't married yet, but I heard she has a fiancé. When I first met her, I greeted her and got a curt reply. Oh, hello, I'm David's sister. When I expressed to David that your sister might not approve of our marriage, he just laughed. No, it's the opposite. She was thrilled to have a sister. She's just shy around new people. Trust me, she was glad to talk to you today. That's what he told me. Her message read, Michelle, I'm sorry about Mom today. Even though you say you know nothing about cooking, I believe in you. She promised me that she who lives with her mother-in-law would take responsibility and handle the trouble so you can rest easy. From that point on, we never visited David's family home, and of course, we stopped communicating with my mother-in-law. That mother-in-law contacted me for the first time in years, and this was the reason. She hadn't changed a bit. Strangely, I found that refreshing. David's sister is a high-powered career woman who often travels for work, and her next trip was going to last 6 months. My mother-in-law, who hates being alone, couldn't bear it. David had told me she had no close friends because of her terrible personality. Well, we live close to David's family home, but we've had no interaction with them. So it's fine to just keep things as they are. That's how I felt, at least. Then one weekend, while David and I were enjoying a leisurely day, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Wondering who it could be, I checked the monitor and was taken aback. There, on the screen, was my mother-in-law, whom I hadn't seen in years. Hey, your mom is here. What? My husband, David, also looked very surprised, so it seemed he hadn't given her our address. Open up, quickly. As she started making a racket outside, considering the nuisance to our neighbors, we reluctantly let her in. Marching inside, my mother-in-law commented, This is my first time here, but the furniture is so plain and dreary. Is this your taste, Michelle? David and I both prefer simple things and have carefully chosen our interior. It may seem plain to some, but we like it. For me, David's parents' house with its clashing reds and blues is dizzying and exhausting. However, this is a matter of personal preference, and it's not about who is right or wrong. So it's not common to voice such opinions out loud. But my mother-in-law is far from common. She is the type to openly speak her mind. Why did you come here? If you came to say such things, could you please leave? When David spoke coldly, my mother-in-law momentarily grimaced, then she turned to me and suddenly prostrated herself. Michelle, I'm sorry about that time. It seems I misunderstood something and caused you distress. I couldn't immediately trust her, but when I said, I'm sorry too, she smirked for a moment, but then took my hand and suggested that we should get along better from now on. I was also pleased to be recognized by her, as I didn't want to be disliked. She proposed to David and me that we should have dinner together on the weekends. David made a worried face and asked me, Are you okay? But I was tired of running away, so I agreed to her proposal. I'll prepare everything, so don't worry about anything and just come and eat. With that, she cheerfully went home. If something happens again, let me know right away. If anything happens again, we'll cut ties completely. David's words alone were reassuring to me. We headed to David's parents' house that weekend. The in-laws' house, which I hadn't seen in years, was just as it was, but remembering what had happened made me feel a bit sick. As we entered the house, my mother-in-law greeted us cheerfully. On the table were David's favorite steak and salad, and then in a small dish, oh no, stew. Just like that day, stew was served. This time, they were lightly colored. Come on, eat up. Eating alone isn't fun, so I got excited and made too much. Bracing for something to happen, but nothing seemed off, I took her word and started eating. As I ate, my mother-in-law watched me with a smirk. After I finished eating, she seemed unhappy. Seeing her like that, I thought, serves you right. Once back home, I immediately ran to the toilet. David was worried, asking what was wrong. Are you okay? Should we go to the hospital? He offered, but after taking some stomach medicine and lying down for a while, I felt better. I still felt a little unwell the next morning, so I took the day off from work. I'm sure it was because of that. That's what I thought. However, since I couldn't confirm that my illness was due to my mother-in-law's cooking, I didn't discuss it with David. After all, it wouldn't feel good to see or hear about his mother, who was supposed to be on my side, doing something as petty as harassing me. I decided to discuss it after I had solid evidence. I would come to regret this decision. The following weekend, we were invited by my mother-in-law again and headed to the in-laws' house. The menu for the day was roasted pork, and almost mockingly, there was stew in the small dish again. That day too, my mother-in-law stared at me as I ate. Once again, she watched me, my face unchanging with a bored look. Just like the previous week, I felt ill on the way home and ended up vomiting in the car. David, sensing something serious was amiss, immediately took me to an emergency clinic. The diagnosis was food poisoning. Did you eat anything spoiled? Without hesitation, I replied yes. Fortunately, my condition didn't worsen and I recovered by the next day. Of course, I discussed the situation with David. In fact, I told him I suspected that my mother-in-law had used spoiled ingredients in the dishes she served me. The first time I tasted the steak, I noticed an unpleasant taste the moment I took the first bite. The inside was nearly the color of raw meat. The fact that David didn't say anything made it clear that my mother-in-law had intentionally tampered with my portion. The vegetables in the stew were also nearly raw, barely cooked. Even the bread tastes stale, while David and my mother-in-law had fresh baked bread. My soup was the only one without any ingredients. The roasted pork from the other day was the same. When I flipped the meat, I could see that it was hardly cooked. Despite all this, I finished my meal entirely out of stubbornness. Seeing my mother-in-law's frustrated face as I remained unfazed, I felt a bit relieved. However, David was pretty mad at me for keeping quiet about it. The next day on his way back from work, David said he would talk to his mother and headed for their house. As expected, my mother-in-law played dumb, but David was not one to let it slide. He reportedly told her, "We are cutting ties. Don't contact us again." My mother-in-law hadn't anticipated being cut off and resisted, but David's resolve did not waver. Seeing David like this, she finally gave in and agreed to his terms, but only after proposing one condition of her own. "And what's that condition?" I asked. "It turns out my sister is getting married. She wants to introduce her fiancé and asked us to have a meal together one last time. I don't think she'll do anything strange in front of the fiancé. Of course, if you're not comfortable, Michelle, I can go alone," he assured me. I had no desire to visit the in-laws' house ever again, but I had always received help from David's sister and I thought they wouldn't do anything strange in front of the fiancé. Deciding this would be the last time, I agreed to attend. A few days later, I received a call from my mother-in-law. Honestly, I was hesitant to pick it up, but curiosity about what she would say got the better of me and I answered the phone. "Hello?" "I'm sorry, I didn't expect you to answer. It's about the dinner at our house." "Yes, what is it?" I replied impassively. My mother-in-law seemed a bit displeased, but it was I who had the right to be angry. From the time I picked up the phone, there was not a single apology for what had happened. In the end, it seemed like a light matter to my mother-in-law. I thought I could never forgive her. "It turns out my daughter's fiancé has many allergies. I've never thought about it before, but I wondered about you two. You know, with the meal preparation and all," she stated. Upon hearing this, I said, "Is that so? We watched a program about allergy tests on TV last year and decided to take them. Turns out, we found out we're allergic to shellfish. It's surprising. It can manifest even in adults." Hearing this, my mother-in-law's voice noticeably brightened, even over the phone. "Oh, is that so? I'll be careful on that day then, so don't worry." With that, she abruptly hung up. That night, I reported to David about the call from my mother-in-law. And then, when I told her about our allergy, she just hung up right away. David listened quietly to my story. The following month, the day of the meal at my in-laws' house arrived. Upon arriving, I saw my mother-in-law in the kitchen. Thinking I should help out like a proper daughter-in-law, at least for the last time, I offered to assist her. "Don't come in here." We were taken aback by my mother-in-law's unusually loud voice. "All right, just consider yourselves guests today, since it's the last time," my mother-in-law insisted. We decided to take her up on the offer, wondering if it was her way of showing remorse. Just as the meal was ready, my sister-in-law texted my mother-in-law. "Reddingly, start without me." Given the time, we decided to begin eating. The food looked normal. As I hesitantly started eating, my mother-in-law laughed and said, "Do you think I did something again? You're a wicked woman, Michelle. Was the food poisoning really my fault?" She was still on about that when David glared at her. "If you want to talk like that, we can leave right now." Whether she was frightened or not, my mother-in-law fell silent. "Let's forget about what's done and done. Try the soup, Michelle. It turned out really well," she said. Forget what's done and done? The perpetrator has no right to say that. I thought to myself, but I couldn't just not drink it. As I lifted the soup bowl, David chimed in. "Is it really that good? Let me try," and took the bowl from me. Wait, that's meant for Michelle," my mother-in-law shouted, but it was too late. Ugh. David suddenly looked in pain and collapsed. My mother-in-law was panicking. "Call an ambulance, hurry! Why?" She tried calling out to him, but he was unresponsive. My mother-in-law was on the brink of tears from the panic. As I watched her, I asked, "What's in the soup?" "It looked like normal vegetable soup." "Shut up. That's not important right now," she retorted. "I'm the one who will accompany him to the hospital. I need to tell them what he ate. So what's in the soup?" "It's just normal vegetable soup." "Isn't it? You probably already know, but the person with the shellfish allergy is David, not me." Unable to bluff any longer, my mother-in-law admitted, "It's a vegetable soup with the broth made from shrimp and crab. I don't understand how this happened. I made it for you." "So it would have been fine if it was me?" "Of course, you even lied about having a shellfish allergy. If something happens to my son, I won't forgive you." My mother-in-law, who had brazenly shifted the blame onto me, declared this while glaring at me. I had never once said that I had an allergy. It was all just her jumping to conclusions. If you understand, call the ambulance. No need to. A low voice resounded, and David, who had been in pain, slowly got up. I didn't drink the soup. I wanted to see your reaction. I didn't think it would turn out like this, though. In fact, David was the one who proposed this plan. When we first addressed my mother-in-law, David and I noticed something. My mother-in-law didn't realize, but we could clearly see the shrimp and crab that had likely been used for the broth. I looked at the food laid out on the table. There was no trace of shrimp or crab anywhere. We thought that it must be the soup and exchanged glances. Of course, David didn't touch his soup at all. If nothing happens today, I was considering reconnecting, as Michelle suggested, but you. I didn't know how serious an allergy could be, she claimed. That's not possible. Seeing her panic when David started to suffer, it was clear that ignorance was no excuse. The fact that she looked at David and thought it might be an allergic reaction was proof enough. Did you really do this thinking Michelle was allergic? I can't believe it. Never show your face to us again. When David said that, my mother-in-law snapped back, Fine, do as you wish. And to have a daughter-in-law who can't cook, it's embarrassing. I have my daughter. I'll rely on her for the rest of my life. I don't need you. And with that, she started laughing hysterically. Are you kidding me? Give us a break. Simultaneously, with that voice, the door of the next room opened. Standing there was my sister-in-law. My mother-in-law was surprised, her eyes wide open. Actually, we had told my sister-in-law everything. She thought it was something her mother would do, and depending on the outcome, she said she would cut ties too. The dinner with her fiancé was also a lie made up by David and my sister-in-law. She had sneaked back home while my mother-in-law was cooking and hid. I saw everything and I heard it all. Was this how you were planning to torment my fiancé if he didn't meet your standards? I would never do something so terrible. My mother-in-law claimed, but David shouted back, That's exactly what you've done. Recognize that you're the one in the wrong. This left my mother-in-law utterly deflated. Anyway, pack up and leave by the end of this month. Since Dad's divorce, I've been paying the rent and the property is in my name. What? Even if you try to stay, it's useless. I'm canceling the lease at the end of this month. My sister-in-law really was getting married and had decided on a new home, and that destination was Singapore. There was no way to follow. The responsible sister-in-law had been looking after her useless mother-in-law who showed no signs of wanting to work after the divorce. Although my sister-in-law was fed up, she had told her fiancé and was still planning on living together. But she could not live with her mother who might threaten her precious fiancé's life. Her act, which disregarded life even if it was an attempt, was enough to anger my sister-in-law. It would be too late if something happened. That's what my mother-in-law had done. Even if you try to depend on us, it's futile. We have already moved and will absolutely not tell you our new address. When I said that, my mother-in-law glared at me. Also, you call me a bad cook, but after that day, I worked hard because I was frustrated. I've been going to cooking classes and have now become quite a good cook. Since I found out about David's allergy, I've been careful with our meals and even got a qualification in nutrition management and food education through correspondence. When I told her that I'm now a better cook than she is, she looked frustrated. Please take care of yourself, I said coldly, and David and I left his parents' house. After that, my sister-in-law told us that my ex-mother-in-law cried and begged her daily. She ignored all of it, and when my mother-in-law saw her packing, she called her a disobedient child and disappeared from the house. In the meantime, my sister-in-law moved and successfully departed for Singapore. Now she is married and living happily. By the way, David's father contacted him a while ago. Even though they were divorced, David and his sister sometimes stayed in touch with their father. According to him, the ex-mother-in-law suddenly appeared at his workplace. I could marry you again, you know. For some reason, she said such an absurd thing to him. Of course, he didn't entertain the idea and had her taken away by security. However, the story didn't end there. She apparently followed him home and barged in. He already has a new family, but the ex-mother-in-law didn't seem to know and screamed, "You're cheating!" The police were called immediately and she was taken away. His father's current wife is a very cheerful person and knows about the past where he was oppressed by his ex-wife's high-handed attitude. If she comes again, I'll brandish pans in both hands to scare her off. She seemed to be quite spirited about the situation, so it seemed okay. We don't know what happened to my ex-mother-in-law after that. With her personality, she's likely to survive, but it's certain she'll have a hard time as she has no one to rely on. It's karma. We as a couple are living peacefully in our new home. I quit my job and David was headhunted by a company with better conditions than before and changed jobs. In fact, shortly after that, we found out I was pregnant. David was present at the birth and his cry of joy echoed louder than the baby's first cry. Seeing David crying so much, the doctors and nurses were laughing, but I thought again that I was glad I married him.
Living together means splitting the bills.
After years of distance, Karen suddenly insisted on moving in. Caught off guard by her abrupt demand, The usually calm Robert was furious and proposed they split the living expenses. But Karen retorted, "What? I am letting you spend time with adorable Emma, and you want to split costs? If that's how you feel, you'll never see Emma again." Little did anyone know the shocking truth behind Karen's bold statement. I'm Olivia and a 60-year-old housewife. Robert retired early, but got rehired at 60. It's been 2 years and he's still working. We have a daughter, Karen, but we have been estranged since she left home after high school. Even though we weren't close, she's still our precious child. We always wondered about her well-being, but no news meant good news, and we were content with our peaceful retirement. Then, out of the blue, she reached out to announce her marriage. It was a surprise, but knowing someone was there to look after the self-centered Karen was reassuring. However, 5 years passed and we started drifting apart again. One day, Karen unexpectedly called. "You're 60 now, right, Mom? It must be tough, just the two of you." We're not that old yet. "But you're aging every day, right? So I've decided to move in with you." "What?" "We're moving next week. See you then." She hung up before I could respond. I tried calling back, but her phone was off. I then tried reaching out to her husband, Thomas, but he didn't answer. Karen has always been stubborn and self-centered. She believed the world revolved around her. When things didn't go her way, she would throw tantrums. We even had neighbors call the police on her. Don't cause trouble to others. We tried disciplining her, but nothing worked. Before we knew it, she left home, and we lost touch until she announced her marriage. Since he wasn't a delinquent, he didn't know who to turn to for advice, and by the time he realized it, it was no longer possible to mend the distance between him and Karen had left the house. I didn't hear from her for several years until it was reported that she got married. We had no idea how she lived during those years. She got married, had a child, but as an adult, she was free to make choices. Thomas seemed kind-hearted and more reasonable than Karen. We hoped marriage would change her, but it didn't. Even as a mother, Karen remained selfish. When Robert came home from work, I told him everything. He said, "Leave it to me." True to her word, Karen arrived the next week with Thomas and Emma bringing all their belongings. I could see that they had brought in their furniture and household items and were eager to stay. She declared, "I'm taking my old room for Emma," and started setting up. Emma seemed restless. And to make matters worse, Karen took over Robert's study. Furthermore, Karen takes over Robert's study without permission. "We'll use this room," she announced, instructing Thomas to move Robert's things. Thomas, ever the obedient husband, complied. If a family is harmonious, that's great, but this couple seemed more like a master-servant relationship than a loving pair. Then Robert stepped in.
You can use the room you were in before, but don't you dare touch my study. Get out now.
He snatched the bags they were moving and kicked Karen and her husband out. "What's your problem? You're old and retired. You don't need a study." "How can you say that? Your father is still working."
I have to keep working to make ends meet. I can't afford to feed you two for free. You'll pay half for the room, utilities, and food. If you're even a day late, you're out.
"Excuse me? We're offering to take care of you in your old age and you want us to pay? We should be charging you for our help."
I'm not so frail that I need a foolish daughter like you to take care of me. If you're unhappy, leave.
"We'll get to live with adorable Emma. What's there to complain about? If you keep this up, you will never see Emma again." Emma was born 5 years ago, and we have hardly seen her since. Threatening to keep her away now doesn't mean much.
So what?
What?
You think bringing up Emma will get you everything? That she's some precious bargaining chip?
What? Robert's unexpected comeback left Karen speechless. It's not that we didn't have any affection for Emma. We wished Karen understood that since we hadn't been able to meet much before, using Emma as an example now was pointless. But Karen didn't get it. She seemed to shift her focus, accusing her own father of being a cold-hearted old man who couldn't love Emma. When asked about the real situation, Thomas said the apartment they were moving to was going to be demolished due to its age. They were told to leave immediately, and it would be a big help if they could stay at Karen's parents' house. He admitted he felt pathetic, unable to afford moving expenses or rent. Honestly, it's Karen's fault for being so self-centered and struggling financially. She probably had a spoiled life, so this outcome was expected. But young Emma had nothing to do with it. She's at an age where adults should protect her. With that thought, the idea of settling conditions without consideration seemed wrong. Interrupting the ongoing argument between Robert and Karen, I chimed in. I'll give you 1 month. Either move out and live as a family of 3 in a new place, or pay half the living expenses and live with Dad as he suggests.
Hey, you know how selfish Karen is, right? If we allow this, she'll definitely take advantage of us.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Trying to calm and outrage Robert, they decided on a 1-month trial of living together. Sure, as Robert said, if we showed leniency, Karen might cling like a leech and never let go, but showing a bit of understanding towards Karen might ease things. We decided to use this month to figure out Karen's intentions. Karen was a housewife and didn't work outside. Thomas left the house at a fixed time every morning and returned at a set time. It turned out that, perhaps because Karen was a housewife, their 5-year-old grandchild had never been to a childcare center or preschool. When asked, Karen said, "It's a waste of money. Thomas doesn't earn much." But Thomas wasn't home on weekends. According to Karen, he was working a part-time night shift as a security guard. If you have time to laze around during the day, why not get a part-time job at the supermarket? I couldn't help but comment. You used to laze around at home watching Korean dramas. Why should I be the only one working? Karen snapped back. Thomas always seemed thin, but since they started living together, he seemed even thinner. Was this Karen's strategy? To show a weakening Thomas and gain sympathy? Determined not to fall for such tactics, we decided to just watch from the sidelines. Then, one day, Emma, playing alone in the living room, suddenly said, "Mom is waiting for Grandma and Grandpa to get awake." Confused, we asked, "What do you mean?" "Well, she wants them to go to a place called Heaven." Karen rushed out of the room, her eyes wide in shock, and quickly she hurriedly covered Emma's mouth and carried her back into the room. From inside, voices could be heard, with Karen telling Emma not to say unnecessary things and to watch a video and stay quiet. Emma seemed distracted by the promise of her favorite video. Karen emerged from the room acting as if nothing had happened. Kids say the darnest things. She probably picked up that line from TV or something. But would a child say something so specific without hearing it regularly? I don't think it's a word that comes out unless you hear it on a daily basis. I suspect Karen has been talking about our assets and how she can get her hands on them. Whether Thomas knows about it is unclear, but she seemed to discuss it openly in front of Emma. Enough with the lame excuses. Explain yourself. Come on, Mom. Don't look so scary. It's just something a kid said. Don't take it seriously. Well, just so you know, there's no inheritance waiting for you. Karen's expression changed at those words. Her eyes filled with resentment. Just then, Thomas came home. It was the weekend and he wasn't supposed to be back because of his night shift. His unexpected return clearly startled Karen. Thomas confronted her, spilling the contents of a thick envelope.
What's the meaning of this?
I picked up one of the scattered items from the floor. It was a photo of Karen looking intimate with another man.
So while I'm working nights, you leave our child alone to go out?
Thomas explained that when they left their previous apartment, he had said goodbye to the landlord. The landlord had mentioned how living with Karen's parents would be good for Emma, which puzzled him. He later found out that Emma had been left alone at very late hours. Initially, he thought it was a one-time thing, but after moving in with Karen's parents, he noticed she was often out during the day. Suspecting something, he hired a private investigator, resulting in the photos. You left Emma alone while I was out for my yoga classes? I attend yoga classes once a week for my health, and often go out for lunch and shopping afterward, returning home in the late afternoon. The thought of Emma being left alone without lunch was heart-wrenching. Missing one meal isn't a big deal.
So while she was alone, you were dining on fancy French cuisine in a hotel?
Thomas pressed her about the affair, and I confronted her about neglecting Emma for her lover. Then Thomas revealed a shocking truth.
She's after your ass's mother-in-law. She plans to dump Emma on you and go on lavish trips with her lover.
Karen retorted, You traitor! Who do you think you married? Being with a boring, straight-laced guy like you is so dull. I need excitement in my life. According to Thomas's confession, Karen had passionately pursued their marriage. Aware of his own plainness, he tried his best to meet Karen's expectations. Whenever they were short on money, he took on part-time jobs. When she said she wanted to look good, he increased his night shifts. As a result, he was always working, rarely spending time at home or with Emma. Once, after being away for about half a month, Emma asked, Who are you, Mr.? She didn't recognize her own father, seeing him merely as a man who brought money. Still, Thomas obeyed Karen out of gratitude for marrying a man like him. However, the money he worked hard for was spent on lavish outings with her lover. She indulged in fine dining while not even providing a proper meal for Emma. He couldn't bear to see his child suffer for Karen's selfishness.
I didn't care if I was abundant, and I decided to reveal everything for the sake of my child. I won't be discarded. I'll expose everything for the sake of our child.
You are not the one being discarded. You are leaving a foolish wife. Don't you dare call me a fool. I have never neglected to feed a child, no matter how much I despised them. Wake up! I won't pretend I never despised Karen for her rebellious ways. Honestly, I did. Deeply. But I never denied her food. To think my own daughter would... Maybe it's impossible to get Karen back on the right track. Every time I tried to help, she seemed to stray further. Don't boss me around. Aren't people in their 60s practically half dead? This house and land will be mine eventually. You might as well give it to me now. You said you had no inheritance to give, but selling this house and land would make money, right? Oh, it's hopeless. I realized wishing for Karen's rehabilitation was in vain. Robert, of course, heard about this and kicked Karen out with nothing. It was essentially disowning her. After being thrown out, she screamed about how all the branded items were hers and that Thomas, who had nothing going for him but being earnest, should be grateful she even used him. Thankfully, a neighbor reported her and she was taken away by the police. It turned out the branded items Karen claimed were all bought with money she made Thomas earn, which she used when meeting her lover. Thomas stood his ground, not giving in. He not only divorced Karen but also secured compensation and child support in the divorce settlement. Karen named her lover as her guarantor, but he quickly rejected her. Apparently, he coldly told her never to show her face again. He enjoyed affairs with married women and lost interest once they were no longer married. Someone else pushed Karen further to the edge. It was someone from the gambling place she frequented while splurging with her lover. Upon learning of her divorce, they demanded immediate payment of her accumulated debts. Even Karen realized she couldn't escape from these intimidating figures. It seems she's now working tirelessly just as she had made Thomas do. Her life has hit rock bottom. After the divorce, Thomas was freed from his torment and his health improved. He transformed into a diligent and clean-cut father, passionate about parenting. He focused on his main job, prioritized time with Emma, and became a well-regarded father in the neighborhood. His relationship with Emma is great, and she often says she loves her dad. We as grandparents do our best to take care for Emma, and our relationship is strong. Robert is utterly smitten with Emma.
Without her mother around, we want to ensure she never feels lonely and shower her with love. After getting rid of the selfish Karen, Emma started laughing more. Every time I hear Emma's laughter, I feel reassured that cutting ties with Karen was the right choice. Now, Karen is rarely a topic of conversation between us. All I wish for as a parent is for her to repay those she wronged and live a modest life. But deep down, Karen is still our child. I hope, while I'm still here, to reunite with a reformed Karen. A part of me still wishes for that.
My name is Emma, and I'm 38 years old. After graduating from college and working for another company, I took over the family sandwich shop, a legacy from my granddad's time. My dad, Robert, who was a second-generation owner, passed away last year after a long battle with illness. Nowadays, I keep the place going with help from our longtime employees. It's a daily grind. However, at the beginning of this year, my younger brother Noah and his wife suddenly said they want to move back into our parents' house. The reason? Noah's company hasn't been doing well. They've lost their housing allowance, and continuing to pay their rent for their apartment has become a struggle. On top of that, Olivia is currently 8 months pregnant, so they want to find a new home quickly to ease their worries. From my perspective, there's enough room for them to move in. However, to be honest, I'm not particularly fond of Olivia. Why? Well, when Dad fell ill, and I was swamped managing the shop and caregiving, I once asked for a little help.
Huh? But I've got my own job. I can't help with the shop or hospital visits. That's your job, Emma. You're the heir apparent, after all.
Look, I get that you're busy, but I'm swamped too. I'm not asking for every day. Just help out at the shop on your days off. That way I can run to the hospital, pick up Dad's laundry, bring him some donuts, things like that.
No way. No way. Even on my days off, I've got golf, socializing with colleagues. There's a lot going on. You probably don't get it, Emma, since you couldn't even stick with a regular job.
Well, that may be true, but...
Plus, I can't ask Olivia to do that kind of stuff.
Why not? Olivia only works part-time 3 days a week, right? Couldn't she help out 1 day a week for Dad's sake?
Nah, can't do. When we got married, Olivia's father-in-law and mother-in-law told me sternly, don't ever let Olivia work in a small store like that in the shopping district.
I see. True, Olivia's in-laws have always looked down on us, saying things like, how could we let our sweet Olivia marry Noah, who's just a shop owner in a shopping district, ever since their marriage was decided. But the fact is, Olivia married into this family, so she should be considered a daughter to Dad as well. Is it really too much to ask for family help when Dad's health took a turn for the worse? Because of these exchanges, our longtime employees, part-timers, neighbors in the shopping district, and even childhood friends have been cold not to just Noah, but also to Olivia whenever she shows up at the shop.
Hey, I parked near the shopping district's entrance, and the chairperson said to me, back for another free meal at Emma's, are you? What's with the snark?
Seriously, how rude. Well, that's a given. This is Noah's parents' place. Doing that much for Noah won't bring about any misfortune. As Olivia said this angrily, laughter erupted from the kitchen among the employees, saying,
Then maybe Olivia should be the one to experience misfortune.
Furious, Olivia and Noah stormed out, taking as many sandwiches and deli items as they could carry. It was hard to feel convinced when Noah later said he wanted to move in together. But unable to say no to a pregnant Olivia, we started living together, even though it didn't feel quite right. 3 months later, perhaps it was no surprise, but living with Noah and Olivia was an absolute disaster. Olivia, now at home all the time after quitting her job, used her first-time pregnancy struggles as an excuse to shove all the household chores onto me. Even though our home is above the store, With the second and third floors as living space, it didn't matter. During business hours, Olivia would demand, "Hey Emma, I'm kind of thirsty. Could you run to the convenience store and get me some organic barley tea?"
It's almost lunchtime and we're pretty busy.
"Come on, it's not a big deal. It's not like you're doing anything important."
Can't you wait a bit? Or take something from the fridge?
"I need it now. Noah drank from the bottle this morning, so now I can't drink it. I'm worried about germs for the baby."
Well, why don't you come down to the store? We have various types of cold barley tea for sale.
"No way. Walking all the way down from the third floor is too much for me. A pregnant woman? You wouldn't understand, Emma. You've never been pregnant or even married."
Look, I may not have given birth, but you knew what you were getting into when you moved back in, right? Plus, we've got a home elevator installed when Mom got sick, so if stairs are a problem, you can use it.
"It's not just about that. I'm talking about your lack of consideration, Emma. Seriously, I'm worried about the future if you act like this now."
In the end, frustrated by Olivia's complaints, I asked my part-time employee to cover for me, went to the convenience store to buy drinks, and delivered them to Noah and Olivia's space on the third floor. Olivia kept finding reasons to summon me for various tasks, but as her due date approached, she went back to her parents' home. After returning home for the birth, Olivia gave birth safely. They said the boy weighed 110.07 ounces. However, I was told by Noah and Olivia to refrain from visiting because they didn't want people to find out that I'm the person who runs the sandwich shop. For the celebratory money, I was instructed to wire it to Noah's bank account. I was somewhat taken aback by their consistent behavior, but since I didn't want to get overly involved, I looked up the typical amount for a gift on the internet and transferred it to the designated bank account. 6 months had passed since Olivia returned from her parents' home. The first thing she said when she showed up in my living space on the second floor was to plop down on the sofa and blurt out,
"So, when are you planning on leaving?"
"What? Leave? This house? Me?"
"Yes. Haven't you heard anything from Noah?"
As she said this, Olivia glanced toward Noah, who hastily began to make excuses. "Well, it's just Emma is almost 40 and lonely, right? It's hard to tell her to move out on her own."
Ugh. "Listen, being kind is one of Noah's good qualities, but you're a dad now. Act like it. Let me say this, Emma, are you aware that you're a woman still living in her childhood room?"
"Living in a childhood room? A woman?"
"Yeah, you've heard of it on the internet and TV, right? You're like one of those women who never left their childhood bedrooms and lives like some kind of monster. Dad's been gone for almost 3 years. Isn't it time you moved out of this house?"
"But if I move out, then this house..."
"Oh, are you worried about the sandwich shop downstairs? If so, no worries. We're shutting it down."
"Shutting it down? Olivia, it's easy for you to say, but what about the employees and part-timers?" "Don't worry about that. I'll properly pay severance according to employment rules. Once Emma leaves, we're going to build a branch office for Olivia's dad's company here."
"What?
"Olivia? Does even your parents-in-law know about this?"
It's more like establishing a branch for Dad's company here was a condition for them to approve of our marriage."
After that, they went on saying things like, "Move out within a month. Hurry up and inform your suppliers, and take any dishes, furniture, or sentimental items from the store area with you." And then, perhaps sensing my silent anger,
"Even if you resent us, trying to squeeze money out of us is pointless."
"Yeah, don't get ahead of yourself. We'll cover the employees, but that's it." It was then that I made up my mind. Fine, I'll move out as quickly as possible. Saying that, I headed downstairs to the shop to discuss what would come next. 3 weeks later, after an extremely busy 3 weeks, I decided to move on the weekend. The weather was perfect for moving. In addition, the bulky items I took from my parents' house were mainly sentimental keepsakes from my dad
and personal belongings, along with pots and knives that had been used by my granddad, dad, and me over 3 generations, so I didn't hire professionals. I got by with the help of people from the local shopping district, former employees, and longtime friends. Most notably, there were muscular men mixed in with my friends who helped carry stuff. They were bankers with a branch in the shopping district, and members of a local baseball team who often frequented my shop.
Emma, anything fraudulent here?
Huh? Which one? That box should be fine. It probably has my granddad's recipe book.
Wait, a recipe book? Isn't that really important? It'd be bad if it got mixed up with the other boxes.
You're right. I'll take it separately in a cab at the end. While we were chatting and moving boxes, Noah and Olivia came down from the 3rd floor. Hey, you're not taking anything extra, are you? Extra stuff? You know, things that you could turn into cash while you're moving. Things I could turn into cash?
Makes sense. It's not like you could afford to hire movers today.
Stop being so critical. Everyone's here to help me out of the kindness of their heart. Ooh, scary. Making useless excuses, huh?
Olivia, let's not make a big deal out of it. I took a look around the truck, and there's nothing of real value anyway. Let's just burn some incense to make sure she never comes back struggling financially again.
Sounds like a plan. Completely drained by their unfiltered insults, I let everyone hurry me along. We loaded all the boxes into the truck and left my parents' house. Several days later, a few days had passed since the move, and I was in a meeting when, just as I'd expected, I received a call from Noah and Olivia.
Emma, what's the meaning of this?
I'm in a meeting right now. What's so urgent? What's so urgent? Some guy just showed up at our house today and said, "This property has been acquired by our bank. Please vacate within 3 days." What's going on? That. Well, then you should do as the banker said.
Do as he said? Are you saying you sold the place without telling us?
It's my property, so what's wrong with selling it? Your property? This place belongs to Noah. Oh, really? Why's that?
What do you mean, why? Dad passed away, so naturally the inheritance goes to me, the son, right?
As Noah and Olivia loudly argue, I inform them that, legally, there's no difference in inheritance between a son and a daughter, so Noah and I would each get half.
Even if that's the case, half of it is still mine. How could you just go and...
Before he could finish. Well, the land and the building weren't Dad's to begin with, so the question of inheritance is moot. Upon hearing this, What? What are you saying? Don't tell me, Emma. Did you deceive Robert, your dad, and get him to transfer the property to you before he passed? And then Olivia starts shouting. My ears start to ache from the yelling, so I tell them I'll be there after my current meeting ends and hang up the phone. 2 hours later, after wrapping up my meeting, I head to my parents' house as promised. Joining me is the bank representative I was meeting with. All right, I'm here. So have you decided where you're moving to?
Why do we have to move out?
Exactly. Why is this happening? Oh, goodness. I hope that taking some time would help you all calm down and think clearly. Seems like that was wishful thinking. What did you say? Then explain it to us now. As Olivia, holding a child, continues to shout with conviction, I decide to spread out the documents I brought and explain things carefully. The land was inherited from my dad's father, my granddad. The building we're currently living in, which also serves as a shop, was rebuilt during my dad's time. Obviously, he couldn't pay for it all at once, so he took out a bank loan in his name to cover the costs. The loan wasn't easy to manage, but given that my mom had fallen ill and become less mobile at that time, Dad insisted on a home with an elevator. So you followed me up to here, right? Yes, we get it. But how does this connect to selling the place? Well, Dad was making the loan payments faithfully, but about 10 years ago, a situation arose where he couldn't make the payments. What do you mean he couldn't make the payments? Global stock market crash. the resulting recession, and on top of that, Noah suddenly says he needs money for studying abroad. So Olivia starts yelling. Was it a lie when you said you got invited to study abroad because of your excellent grades? But I decided to ignore that and keep talking. Of course, Noah's academic excellence was all a lie. Flashy and showy, Noah started college, but kept failing classes until he dropped out. Not wanting to tarnish his reputation, he first enrolled in a language school overseas, then managed to slide his way into a local college there. Dad wanted to leave him to me, but Mom was soft on Noah, so she took the deed to the land and sold it. She sold it? Yes, luckily the head of the Merchants Association bought it, so we could continue living here just by paying market rate rent. What about the building then? After Mom sold the land, the money Noah needed was taken care of. However, in addition to the loan payments, Dad now had to pay rent for the land. Struggling financially, he considered selling the building and closing the shop. Seeing my dad like this, I couldn't stand it. I reached out to a gathering of young entrepreneurs in the area. They introduced me to a real estate-backed loan company, and I arranged a family sale contract with Dad. Family sale contract? What's that? That's when the bank representative who came with us chimed in on the conversation between me, Noah, and Olivia. So, if you can't pay the mortgage, typically you'd lose your home, right? To avoid that, Emma has secured a loan from a real estate secured loan company for the remaining mortgage amount. She's buying this house from Robert with that money. Emma is buying this house from Dad? Exactly. The money Emma paid will be used by Robert to settle the debt with the bank he had the mortgage with. Then the house will be under Emma's name. This allows you all to keep living here and continue the business. But keep in mind, Emma will be the one paying off this loan from now on. Right. So how I deal with this place is up to me. Got it? When I said I wanted to buy the house, Dad was initially against it, saying I was too young for such responsibility. But I convinced him, pointing out that being young meant I could take a longer mortgage term, reducing the monthly payments. I could use my savings from my time as an employee entirely for the down payment, and I'd move back into my parents' house to help out, so I'd have no more rent to worry about. In the end, the chairman of the Merchants Association, who became the landowner, also convinced Dad, which allowed us to continue the business. But now, with Dad gone, and Noah and Olivia making life difficult, I questioned my reasons for staying. I sought advice from both the bank that gave me the loan and the chairman who owns the land. It turns out that the chairman's grandchild wanted to open a clinic, so things fell into place quite smoothly. By the way, you do remember that I deposited Noah's $15,000 inheritance share directly into his bank account, right? Well, whether you remember or not, the matter is settled. This conversation is over. With that, I left the house, ignoring Noah and Olivia's commotion. What happened next? Noah and Olivia had been planning to eventually sell our parents' house to Olivia's dad and use that money to buy a high-rise condo for themselves. However, their plan failed spectacularly. Even Olivia's dad, who had been keen on acquiring our land, seemed to have ignored them. There was a reason Olivia's dad was so eager to get his hands on our land. Actually, not far from our neighborhood, past the local shopping district and close to the city's train station, construction has begun on 2 large high-rise apartment buildings. With a total of 397 units, the economic benefits for the local community are expected to be significant. While several developers have shown interest in the shopping district land, it's not easy for outsiders to join this tight-knit community. It seems that Noah and Olivia's relationship has soured quickly after this incident. They've decided to divorce, but are currently arguing over alimony and child support payments. I've received multiple calls from Noah asking to borrow money. But I firmly stated, a woman living in a kid's room doesn't have money to spare. I then left a text message for any future references and blocked all other means of communication with him. As for me, a banker I've gotten to know suggested that I start a food truck business. I now operate in the parking space of what used to be my shop, but is now a clinic, at events, and also serve corporate lunches through introductions from the bank. Not only have longtime customers started buying sandwiches, but the number of new customers has increased as well. I've even added a second food truck and employed some of my former workers. Plans are underway to focus on selling deli items in the evenings, targeting working moms. Inspired by the recipes left by my granddad and dad, I'm more motivated than ever to succeed.